theme for today, which was why New Zealand is the world's worst lovers. I mean, Gary, if you want to contribute.
No. It was at a friend's place, and this was a dreadful bed. So no.
And it's with Pips, so you say.
Yeah. Oh, thank God for that.
Cliffhanger ending.
I'd be classified as a bad lover or something. Quite
No, you wouldn't be, Gary. No, you wouldn't be. Gary Moore.
It's been a pleasure.
It's Friday tomorrow. I'll be back at 3:45. See you then.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere nei is China pilfering intellectual property from Kiwi companies. The Five Eyes Security Alliance calls it out for brazen thieving. So we talk to a business playing high-stakes whack-a-mole with counterfeiters. President Joe Biden declares the other team bombed a Gaza hospital, not Israel. An aid corridor is being opened and new evidence shows the level of planning behind the Hamas attacks. Back home, who's on board with getting a direct international flight back into Dunedin? We talk to the 13-year-old leading the campaign and looking for an elevated position in a fast-moving environment. Well, saddle up because we've probably got something for you. You can watch us live on the RNZ website. RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. Palestinians have been gathering at the Rafah crossing in the hope of leaving ahead of an expected Israeli ground offensive. The UN has also been positioning food and medical supplies at the border point, preparing for its opening. World Watch's Charlie Drever reports.
US President Joe Biden and his Egyptian counterpart Abdel Fattah el-Sisi have agreed to open up the crossing to allow up to 20 trucks of aid into Gaza. President Biden says this will likely happen by Friday local time. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has agreed to allow the aid as long as the supplies don't go to Hamas. When asked by reporters on the possibility of letting people leave Gaza via Rafah, Mr. Biden said they're going to get people out, but he wasn't going to go into any detail right now.
A family-run business that makes wine and beer coolers and tumblers says it's constantly fighting off mostly Chinese-made replicas of its product. Huski founder Simon Husa says that as soon as they sold on Amazon and won a design award, they had a target on their back. He says spending more than $50,000 to get their trademark and design protected has saved them millions, but it still costs thousands chasing each copycat manufacturer. In the past year, they've issued cease and desist letters about 70 times. The Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance yesterday called out China for large-scale theft of intellectual property. Protesters have forced their way into a meeting at Massey University's Auckland campus to confront the Vice-Chancellor over plans to cut 30% of the humanities and social sciences staff. Student Association Vice President Massey Wilson says he was blocked by security when he arrived.
Eventually we got in and we had a chance to speak to the Chancellor. We told her we know the scare tactics she's using to pit professors against each other, and we're here to be the voice for the teachers and the students and say that the senior leadership team need to stop the cuts and that Jan Thomas needs to resign.
Massey Wilson says the Student Association will keep protesting over coming days. RNZ understands the man responsible for killing 62-year-old Irene Katsuyanis in her home in the Wellington suburb of Miramar was her son. Soterios Katsuyanis left the country on Sunday, the day before his mother's body was discovered, and was later found dead in Hong Kong. Ms Katsuyanis was well known in the netball community. Netball Wellington's Sue Gill says she was part of the centre between 2014 and 2021 and set up the Olympic Club, so the news of her death came as a huge shock. Ms Gill says their venue has been offered to Olympic club players to get together and remember their coach. Businesses along Wellington's Thorndon Quay have been given less than a week to prepare for a year's worth of disruption while a cycleway is installed. Director of Co-Kids Childcare Centre, Steve Piper, says a contracting crew from Downer visited on Tuesday to tell them work will begin next week. The car parks outside will be blocked off and he's been offered 4 substitute parks 50 metres down the road while the cycleway is built, and that could take up to a year.
They started showing us these plans and we're going, well, no, sorry, you can't, it's not enough warning to let our customers know that potentially they may have some parks 50 metres down the road, they may have.
Steve Piper says this just won't work with a roll of 100 kids needing pickups and drop-offs simultaneously. In sport, creating greater turnover ball on defence is the focus for the Silver Ferns as they scrap to keep the Constellation Cup series alive tonight in Invercargill. Australia hold a 2-0 lead in the 4-test series and New Zealand must win the next 2 and overturn a 19-goal differential if they're to wrest the trophy off the Diamonds. Assistant Silver Ferns coach Deb Fuller says their mission tonight is to win more ball.
There's no excuses going into this game in terms of, that adaptation. This game really is about being able to match their ability to keep possession and get more defensive ball.
Despite having less than a week to recover from their energy-sapping quarter-final over Ireland, the All Blacks know they need to keep up their intensity. There are 2 changes to the starting 15, which edged out Ireland for Saturday's semi-final against Argentina, with Mark Pelea back on the left wing after being stood down for disciplinary reasons. He replaces Lester Whangaianuku, while Sam Whitelock replaces Brodie Retallick at lock. Fullback Beauden Barrett says they need to find a way to be even better this weekend.
Emotions, the intensity, it's all on the line this weekend. It's our final. Once again, it's how we treated last week's game. And we know from previous lessons that intensity needs to be matched, if not increased, from the previous week when it comes to knockout rugby.
And Black Ferns winger Ruby Tui will play her first test since last year's World Cup win, having been named in the lineup for the side's test against France on Saturday. That's the news.
Peculiar pets.
Possum's claws are just much worse than a cat's claws.
Rugby wraps up.
Argentina will be up for it. They've got nothing to lose. They're expected to be beaten by the All Blacks, so they can lay it all out on the line.
And a crafty cyclist.
You have a large cargo bike and the broom is attached. It just goes along, just lightly brushing the road in front of your wheels.
Tidy Kiwis, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For Northland, mostly cloudy. Occasional rain, mainly in the north, gradually spreading south tomorrow. Auckland and Coromandel, fine weather today, becoming cloudy tomorrow morning with a few showers in the east tomorrow evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine apart from isolated showers this afternoon and evening. Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty, the Central High Country and also Wairarapa, partly cloudy. Isolated showers today and also areas of fog tomorrow morning. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, mainly fine today. Showers about the fjords and Rakiura, Stewart Island, spreading elsewhere tomorrow. For the remainder of the South Island, fine for most. However, isolated showers about Westland tomorrow. And also areas of morning cloud about the Canterbury coast. And Chatham Islands, mainly fine. Low cloud tomorrow morning. It is 7 minutes past 5. Traffic news and headlines are at 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint i tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. An expensive game of whack-a-mole that can destroy some businesses. That is how a boutique New Zealand company describes the constant battle against China-based counterfeiters stealing their intellectual property. In a rare joint statement, bosses from the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance yesterday called China out for alleged large-scale theft of intellectual property and using artificial intelligence intelligence for hacking and spying. Following a security summit at Stanford University in California, FBI Director Christopher Wray said the unprecedented joint call was meant to confront the unprecedented threat China poses to innovation across the world. Huski is a husband and wife company that was set up in 2017 and makes award-winning wine and beer coolers, tumblers and flutes. And joining us now is one of the company's founders, Simon Husa. Kia ora, Simon. What's your experience been with people pinching your intellectual property?
Kia ora. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of something that I guess comes along with success. We're in the fortunate position that we've done well and we feature well on Amazon and have won a few design awards. And with that, we always knew going into it there was the risk of copies or our designs being taken and replicated. And that's what we're finding now with the more successful that we've got, especially on the international stage, is that we start to see products that look incredibly like ours, where we've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars to come up with unique and innovative designs. Then someone takes that and then goes, okay, that looks great, that's selling well, let's replicate that and pop it onto a website like Alibaba, and then that filters down to Amazon or Catch or Kogan or various other marketplace type websites or other retailers around. So for us, this year we've taken down. Sorry.
No, you carry on. I was going to ask you how frequently it happens.
So increasingly frequently, which I guess comes again with success. So this year we would have taken down in excess of 70 listings. So they can be from a factory or from a set of suppliers who will take our designs, replicate them, make them in their factories, and then offer them up to either consumers for sale or often for resellers. So individuals or companies who will then buy in mass quantities and sell them on their own websites or marketplaces. So yeah, we've had around 70 this year, and we've had quite good success with taking them off, but that's because we're in the fortunate position where we put the effort up front to protect those designs through IP protections, registered designs, utility patents and things like that. So,
but presumably you're still having to pay someone like a lawyer to track these companies down and send them cease and desist letters?
Yeah, it's an ongoing thing that because you shut one down and the next one pops up, right? And it's hard to track down these factories or even know who's supplying it. You don't know, is it one factory, is it 10 factories with different listings? So yeah, every month we have processes and systems in place where we have to try to spot these things as and when they pop up. We work with a great lawyer who's really helpful because IP can be a complicated area to play in and an expensive area. And then we try to shut those down. And again, we've had good success, but it's a tough, expensive game. You're talking, tens of thousands plus to just set up those initial protections and then thousands of dollars ongoing to try to spot and take down those listings. But if you don't do it at that early stage where the factories are selling to individuals who are reselling it, it becomes an even more expensive game, because if they get to a point where they're in retail stores, that's potentially taking millions away from at the other end. So you've got to kind of tackle it early to minimise the costs as much as possible.
And Simon, where is most of the production, the counterfeit production, happening as far as you can see?
What we've found is it's overwhelmingly coming from China. And that's where most of the world sources products, and especially products like ours. So, yeah, that's where it's originating, and then it lands on foreign shores, and it's much harder to track down once it lands in Australia or the US. So we focus a lot of our efforts trying to stop it getting out of China in the first place.
You've got some of your fine products sitting there with you, the coolers and the tumblers and the glasses. I mean, how much does it cost you to develop an idea like that? Just to put it into some context, if someone starts making a cheap knockoff, it's not just the price of the item, is it? It's all the money you've spent developing it.
Totally. That's the biggest thing. So we've just launched these new flute tumblers, keep your wine perfectly cold while you're drinking, or perfectly chilled. A product like this took us 18 months and, getting up towards sort of $100,000 to design this product and bring it to market. What you're then seeing is, if it's successful and it sells well, especially if it's on Amazon or it wins design awards, the factories will pick that up and go, hey, that looks great. they'll get hold of a sample, potentially just by buying it, take it back, deconstruct it, and go, okay, we can replicate this, and often make it with, more inexpensive materials, cheaper quality stainless steel, cheaper plastics, and it won't be the same, but it will look in a picture to be, 80% as good. Somebody buys it, they use it, they get a weird taste in their mouth because they might have used, not quite the same grade of stainless steel, or if it's got, even worse, if it's got Huski written on it, it's not from us. There's some brand trust that's broken down there. So, yeah, it's massive for us. I mean, we invest a lot of time and effort to try to make cool products, and it can hit us really hard if somebody then doesn't receive, our products. And over time, if we don't tackle it, we think we'll pay the price. So that's why we put the effort in up front to try to knock it on the head.
We're almost out of town, but very quickly, I'm sure you speak to other businesses. Is it a widespread problem?
Yeah, when we started the Huski business, we spoke to a lot of other businesses who were designing innovative products, and we said, look, what are the challenges and what do we need to think about? And they told us up front, they're like, if you are successful, you are going to run into these kinds of problems, which was great because that told us that, okay, we need to invest in it. And that's why we linked up with a lawyer, Gnarly. He's a great guy, and he walks us through, okay, these are the types of protections you can put up. It's kind of like building a wall around your house. Like you can build a little wall or you can build a big wall. And it's hard to know how high it needs to be because it can get incredibly expensive very quickly. So finding the right person, understanding the environment you're operating in can play a massive role.
Really appreciate your time, Simon. Good to talk to you. That's Simon Husker is from Huski. They make those award-winning wine and beer coolers, and he's playing a game of whack-a-mole with people counterfeiting his product. And just in response to that statement from the Five Eyes Alliance, China has responded saying it opposes the groundless allegations and smears towards China by the Five Eyes members. It is 14 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The smallest of reprieves for a people under near constant attack. Egypt's president has agreed to open up the Rafah crossing into Gaza, allowing crucial aid to reach people who have been under siege from Israeli missiles for more than 10 days. After talks with US President Joe Biden, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also agreed to allow up to 20 trucks containing humanitarian aid into Gaza, as long as the supplies don't go to Hamas. In turn, President Biden backed Israel's strong denial of any involvement in an explosion that killed hundreds of people at a hospital in Gaza, something many Palestinians don't accept. The BBC's Jeremy Bowen filed this report from southern Israel.
A car park outside the Al Ahli hospital became a killing ground. The arguments about who's responsible come too late for the people whose lives ended here. Even with their bodies taken away, the cleanup this morning also meant collecting small pieces of flesh. God have mercy, he said. They were civilians. And Mohammed al-Sawafari, a neighbour, can't unsee children with legs blown off and the bodies he helped carry. They all, he said, thought they'd be safe near a hospital. Early this morning at the Defense Ministry in Tel Aviv, the military presented data it said proved Israel did not attack the hospital. Instead, they said it was a malfunctioning rocket fired by Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
The trajectory analysis from the barrage of rockets confirms that the rockets were fired close proximity to the hospital. According to our intelligence, Hamas checked the reports, understood it was an Islamic Jihad rocket that had misfired, and decided to launch a global media campaign to hide what really happened. They went as far as inflating the numbers of casualties.
Coming to Tel Aviv was a gamble for President Biden. He wanted to ease Gaza's humanitarian catastrophe while supporting Israel's war effort, perhaps an impossible circle to square with Israel's leader, Benjamin Netanyahu. But a deal emerged from their meeting. Food, water, and medicine, but no fuel from Egypt to Gaza. For Israel, more military aid and agreement that they didn't hit the hospital.
And based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team, not you. I wanted to personally come and make that clear. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to having a thorough discussion about where everybody goes from here.
The president won't change the minds of those who insist Israel attacked the hospital.
Joe Biden's presence here will only deepen the conviction among Palestinians and millions of other Arabs that America isn't just on Israel's side, but that it's also complicit in everything Israel is doing in Gaza, including killing civilians. Until the Hamas attacks on Israel, President Biden dreamt of transforming the Middle East. The Americans were negotiating with Saudi Arabia and Israel to try to get the two countries to recognize each other. That is not on the agenda anymore.
Grief is crushing the families of Gaza's dead. Israel was warned by Joe Biden not to be consumed by rage. While in Gaza's Shifa hospital, a father was saying goodbye to his dead children in a corridor that's been turned into a mortuary.
And back home, a Wellington mother who RNZ understands was killed by her son was a beloved member of the community she lived in. Irene Katsuyanis was found dead in her home in Miramar on Monday. Our reporter Lauren Crimp joins us now from Miramar. Lauren, what more do you know about this case?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yes, I'm outside the address on Tōtara Road where Irene Katsuyanis' body was found on Monday. Now, RNZ understands it was her son who was responsible. Police are still describing the person responsible as a man who was known to her. They say he left the country on Sunday before her body was found and has since died in Hong Kong. They say police there are still investigating.
And Irene was well known in her community. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, she was, Lisa. Look, tributes have been flowing in from across the Wellington community. Irene was a piano tutor at Queen Margaret College, and the principal today put out a statement expressing their sadness and condolences for the family. Now, she was also heavily involved in netball, setting up the Olympic Netball Club as part of Netball Wellington. Netball Wellington say they have offered their venue to players to get together and celebrate someone who they described as the lady that was. They say there has been an outpouring of concern and support. A family friend, Katie, told RNZ she was shocked and that her loss would be felt far and wide. And finally, a Greek community group, Odysseus Brotherhood, posted on social media today saying they were saddened at the tragic loss of their friend. They are offering their thoughts and prayers. Now, in terms of next steps, we know that the scene examination here is due to be wrapped up by this weekend. Police will then give their report to the coroner.
Thank you for the update, Lauren. That is Lauren Crimp joining us live from Miramar. It is 21 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai Ofakaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Interested if you're in business, whether you've had any issues with designs being stolen from overseas sources. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time for the headlines. Evie is standing by. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
A family-run business that makes wine and beer coolers and tumblers says it's constantly fighting off replicas of its products. Huski founder Simon Husa says that as soon as the company sold on Amazon and won a design award, they had a target on their back. He told Checkpoint it costs thousands chasing copycat manufacturers who are overwhelmingly based in China. The killer of a 62-year-old Wellington woman in her Miramar home is believed to have been her son. Soterios Katsuyanis left the country on Sunday, the day before the body of Irene Katsuyanis was discovered and was later found dead in Hong Kong. US President Joe Biden says he has secured an agreement for the delivery of a limited amount of aid to Gaza via Egypt. The United Nations says it has systems in place to prevent the aid from falling into the hands of Hamas. Protesters who forced their way into a meeting at Massey University's Auckland campus are calling for the resignation of Vice-Chancellor Jan Thomas over plans for major job cuts in the humanities and social sciences. And Ports of Auckland is increasing its user charges, saying it wants to give the city's ratepayers a fair return. The charges are going up from $65 to $95 during the day and from $20 to $40 at off-peak times. Chief Executive Roger Gray says they're also introducing a $20 charge for moving a container from within the port onto a rail line. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic. Let's have a look. In the Bay of Plenty, State Highway 2, the Waiaweka Gorge Road, Matawaitu or Portsiki, reopened to traffic at 5 p.m. this afternoon and will close again 7 a.m. in the morning until 2 p.m. for resurfacing. So I hope that doesn't affect your long weekend plans. Our next traffic news and headlines are at 20 to 6.
Thank you, Evie. The All Blacks have welcomed protocol breaker Mark Talia back into the starting side for the semi-final match against Argentina. Sam Whitelock joins Talia in the starting side and Samisoni Taukei'aho comes in for Dane Coles on the bench. With the team set, the focus now turns to the big game on Saturday morning New Zealand time, and our rugby reporter Joe Porter joins us now from Paris. OK, Joe, what was the reason given for the team changes?
Bonjour, Lisa. Well, Mark Talia, he was the All Blacks' first choice wing, has been all year. And of course, like you've mentioned, he was stood down last week for breaching team protocol. The quote from Ian Foster, his words exactly were, Mark has done his time and he's been welcomed back into the starting side for this big semi-final match. Sam Whitelock comes in for Brodie Retallick at lock, as we expected. That's due to Brodie Retallick and Scott Barrett, the locking pair from last week's game against Ireland, playing the full 80 minutes. So it's just a chance for Brodie Retallick to freshen up ahead of what they hope will be a final against either South Africa or England. And on the bench with Samisoni Taukei'aho coming in for Dane Coles, that's just a matter of Samisoni not having had much game time this World Cup, and they want to give him a chance to get a bit of that under his belt if in case there's any issues in the hooking department come finals time.
And Joe, Sam Cane and Ian Foster were also asked about Rieko Ioane's actions at the end of the Ireland game. Now tell us about that.
Yes, well, of course, Rieko Ioane was filmed in a bit of a heated discussion with Johnny Sexton, the Irish first five, post that win last weekend. The story goes that he told Johnny Sexton to enjoy retirement and to not miss his flight back home to Ireland. Now, we're not sure if that can be verified or not. I've spoken to some sources within New Zealand Rugby. They tell me that that wasn't the words that were used, or they weren't the words that were used. But Ian Foster and Sam Cane just said, look, what goes on the field stays on the field. It was just a reaction. Obviously, Rieko Ioane cupped his ear to the crowd, of course, the Irish crowd, who were very vocal last weekend, and a sort of a gesture to say, hey, look, you must be quiet now that we've won. And to be honest, all's fair. It's a battleground out there. These guys go to war each weekend against each other, and Johnny Sexton has a lot of history of being pretty chirpy on the field in terms of talking to the ref and talking to other players. So I would say it's just a bit of on-field banter, and there's nothing more to it than that. And Coach Ian Foster and Sam Cane described it as such.
OK, Aaron Smith got one of 2 yellow cards last weekend, and he's had more to say about that.
Yeah, he was very disappointed in himself. He was quite hard on himself, saying that he had a very poor start to the game last weekend where his passes found no one. And then, of course, he was yellow carded, and he thought that could be the end of the All Blacks' chances of winning that game. So he was obviously very, very nervous sitting on the sideline for 10 minutes as Ireland scored a try and came roaring back into that match. But in the second half, he did produce a very impressive performance to help the All Blacks win what was an incredibly tense and thrilling quarter-final. So I would expect Aaron Smith to be heavily motivated to play a very, very big game this weekend.
Hey Joe, before you go, I'm really enjoying the foot traffic there in Paris, the early morning jogger, and a dog wandering around behind you, and it appears to be some boats. Where exactly are you, for the people who are listening and not watching, please?
I'm on the banks of La Seine, the River Seine here in Paris, not far from the Eiffel Tower. There's a lot of, like you see, the boats behind me parked up. They sort of double up as hotels and bars and restaurants. And during the evenings, these places are absolutely packed with Parisians enjoying a bit of a vino down by the river. It's a lovely spot to be. And yeah, if you come down here anytime after 5 in the morning, it gets pretty chock with runners. If you're here in a few hours' time, you'll barely be able to walk along this place without bumping into people.
Must be absolutely horrible for you, Joe. That is Joe Porter joining us from Paris there. 27 minutes after 5, Kia amo tunu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa e nainei ko Nona Peltier. Nona is in the studio with me today. In New Zealand, now, I watched this story with interest, Nona. They're setting up a call centre, but the call centre is overseas. Why Why is it doing that?
It's an interesting one. So they do have a call center here, which they are going to continue to maintain. They're saying that this additional call center is to support the one they have in New Zealand. They've been trying to recruit additional people to answer customer complaints and inquiries and so on, have struggled to recruit enough people to man the phones. So they've decided to go with a call center in the Philippines via a company, an Australian-based company. So we'll see what happens with that. They're not abandoning the call center here in New Zealand. They're just adding support to it.
Have they wondered out loud as to why they have so many people ringing for complaints in the call centre, the core of the problem?
I don't know. I haven't been talking to them today. Have you, Lisa, been able to talk to them
Unfortunately
today?
not.
No.
So, okay.
Well, another chance. We'll get another opportunity at some time in the future to ask them about that.
All right, let's move on to cakes and slices and things.
So delicious.
I would say Sara Lee has gone into administration, the company that makes all the slices and things. What would you say, Nona?
I'd say Sara Lee.
Okay.
Is there much of a
posh
difference?
version. That's the posh version.
What?
Evie's eyebrows just went up. What would you say, Evie, quickly?
Sara Lee.
Sara Lee. Okay,
Sarah.
let's advance.
Well, is there an H in that? Or I'm not sure. I don't think so.
So why has that gone into administration?
Well, operationally, they're having some struggles with supply and inflation costs and so on. I guess there's a price that people are willing to pay for their cakes, and it might be just a little bit high at the moment. So what they're going to do, the administrators, they're going to restructure the company, try and make it profitable again. But in the meantime, there's going to be a creditors meeting next week so that, they have debt. And so, yes, they're going to try and save the company. Certainly, I'm sure that the fans of the cakes and slices and so on will certainly be waiting.
Well, I wonder if there are fans. 2101 on text with your Sara Lee memories, because a few of us remember the frozen cheesecakes for sure.
Delicious. I remember the chocolate cakes, but you don't have those here, do you?
No. Cheesecake.
Sorry.
But
Okay,
let's
cheesecake,
go
yeah.
to the markets, Nona. Take us for a spin around those.
Okay, so the top 50 index, it fell 0.75% today. That was an 86-point drop to 11,136. And that's in line with what we've seen in Asia. People are worried. The war in Israel, so on. Yes, it's upsetting people. Gold prices apparently are near 2-month peaks. So the New Zealand dollar, though, 58.3 US cents, 92.5 Australian, and 48 pence. 48, Lisa.
48, Nona. Thank you for that. Nona Peltier with Business News there. Ka kite. A CNN investigation has uncovered new evidence revealing Hamas gathered extensive intelligence on Israeli targets before launching their deadly attack on Israeli communities near the Gaza border. It comes as US President Joe Biden arrived in Israel for a 7.5-hour visit, meeting with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and securing an agreement for the delivery of 20 trucks of humanitarian aid to Gaza. Now, CNN's global affairs correspondent Matthew Chance has found evidence Hamas's attack involved meticulous planning. A warning, if you are watching or listening, this story is graphic and distressing.
CNN has gathered chilling new insights and details on the Hamas assault inside Israel, including disturbing video taken by the attackers themselves as they rampaged through Israeli homes, killing on sight, and then being killed. Searches of their dead bodies revealing a trove of highly specific Hamas battle plans, including these detailed maps now shared with CNN by the Israeli government, showing communities near Gaza, like Kfar Aza, targeted by the attackers. These were the terrifying scenes inside, as Hamas gunmen recorded themselves moving freely through the gardens of Israeli homes. Code red, the Israeli loudspeaker blares in Hebrew, punctuating the sporadic gunfire. After the attack, Israeli first responders saw bullet holes and bloodstains in room after room, in what looks like a coldly methodical killing spree.
But while hundreds of Israelis were killed, some Israeli communities managed to repel the Hamas gunmen and save lives. At Kibbutz Mefalsim, also near Gaza, residents pushed back a Hamas attack and found documents on the bodies of the militants they killed, with disturbing, highly accurate intelligence on their homes.
Including precise numbers of armed guards there. Regional Defence Force, at least 20 residents, one document reads, and 10 soldiers.
They knew basically the size of our security team. They knew about other 3 or 4 entrances to the kibbutz.
It sounds like they knew everything.
They knew everything. Where the generators are. They knew where the armory is. They knew about rural roads around the kibbutz.
Security footage shows how Hamas gunmen killed an Israeli outside the kibbutz gates before being repelled. Even with detailed intelligence on their targets, not every Hamas objective was achieved. Nearby Kibbutz Saad wasn't even attacked, although we now have documentary evidence that Hamas intended to inflict the maximum possible human casualties there and to hold hostages. A highly detailed street map found on another Hamas gunman and obtained by CNN shows individual buildings in Saad, identified and assessed for their military value. The communal kitchen, for example, is described as the main place suitable for holding hostages. Inside the guard room, the soldiers must be neutralised, the Hamas instructions say. While the kibbutz dental clinic is designated a place for first aid for both enemies and friends. Israeli residents of Saad say they also found that level of detail astounding.
Shockingly, the details are very accurate. The map is a map of our kibbutz. It's very accurate. It's horribly accurate.
If they'd have come to your settlement, they would have known exactly where to go, exactly where to cause the most damage.
Yes, and we now see that their goal was to take hostages, including children.
Israeli officials say they found other documents too that advise attackers to kill anyone posing a threat or causing a distraction, to keep captives away from arms or means of suicide, and to use them as cannon fodder. It is a dark turn. Even for a group seen here parading before the attacks, that's come to symbolise the uncompromising face of Palestinian resistance and violence against Israel. Israeli officials say a document referencing ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which CNN has not been able to authenticate, was found on one Hamas gunman killed during this attack on Kibbutz Be'eri. The document given to CNN by a senior Israeli government official praises jihad against Jews and crusaders. Israeli officials say that's evidence Hamas is increasingly influenced by global jihadi ideology, an assessment many experts have dismissed. But in the wake of the unprecedented brutality of these attacks, US officials tell CNN the Hamas threat may now be reassessed.
And that report from CNN's Global Affairs correspondent Matthew Chance. It is 24 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Some restaurant owners are looking forward to the end of fair pay agreements and the reintroduction of 90-day trials. They're two promises made by National on the campaign trail. But the Union for Hospitality Workers says the move would be a counterproductive backwards step. Bill Hickman has more.
National's strong election night result gave some Restaurant Association members reason to cheer. In a post-election poll, 80% of businesses surveyed were positive about what the change in government would mean for the industry. Association CEO Marissa Boudoir says the results were in stark contrast to earlier in the year when only 1/5 of members expected their lot to improve.
Our industry has gone through a lot over the last few years. There have been a lot of challenges, a lot of financial hardship as well. We need the optimism. We need our business owners to be, feeling optimistic about the future. That's important to the growth and innovation in our sector.
She says owners are pleased about the incoming government's focus on addressing legislation that has been challenging for restaurants, such as the fair pay agreements and 90-day trial periods.
The 90-day trial periods are, all about providing, a balance of risk for our businesses as well. They give an employer and an employee an opportunity to step into a business and experience the business and figuring out, is this the right fit for the business? And that's on both sides.
Tricky Hartley employs 19 people in his Auckland restaurant, The Conservatory. He says the employers have been bogged down in slow process and red tape and needed to be free to make the best choices for their staff and their business.
Any good employer will pay their staff what they're worth, and that's 98% of the industry. Obviously, the wages have gone up, and rightly so. But to then have a blanket approach that we have to pay people a certain amount, we have to give X amount of holiday pay, we have to give X amount on public holidays, doesn't work for a lot of businesses.
But Unite Union National Secretary John Crocker disagrees. He says hospitality was rife with employment abuse and the move would be a counterproductive step back.
It's a troubled industry. We see widespread minimum standards breaches, and it needed to be addressed. And with the introduction of 90-day trials, we're going to see just fuel on that fire. If you've got a minimum standards breach, like not getting your breaks, which is pretty common in hospitality, you speak up about it and get fired for asking your employer not to break the law.
He says it was overly simplistic to look at fair pay as a one-way street.
The higher minimum wages are, yes, employers have to spend a little bit more money, but also their customer base increases, and those people have more disposable income. The less inequality we have in our society, the richer the customer base for small businesses.
Co-owner of Wellington's Gray's Wine Bar, Max Gordy, says his small business model meant he was able to pay his staff well. He says larger businesses might find it more of a challenge to do the right thing by their staff.
I think there's a lot of people that abuse the system, and I think that if hospitality workers had a little bit more confidence, they could make sure that those people that have abused the system aren't able to do that in the future. But unfortunately, a lot of people feel unconfident and bullied by a lot of big people using those 90-day trials.
Max Gordy says the relationship between employees and employers works better if both parties can openly communicate about workplace issues without fear of recrimination.
It is 20 to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai or whakaro, do send us your feedback. We love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the program this evening. Some of you getting in touch about the theft of intellectual property. Do keep it coming. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time for the headlines now. Anea Evi, mena pitpita kōrero.
US President Joe Biden says he has secured an agreement for the delivery of a limited amount of aid to Gaza, where 12 days of Israeli siege and bombardment have caused an acute humanitarian crisis. He says President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi of Egypt has agreed to open the Rafah border crossing and let up to 20 trucks through. The killer of a 62-year-old Wellington woman in her Miramar home is believed to have been her son. Soterios Katsuyanis left the country on Sunday, the day before the body of Irene Katsuyanis was discovered, and he was later found dead in Hong Kong. The number of suspected suicides has risen slightly. New data from the chief coroner shows the rate for the year ending June was 10.6 for every 100,000 people, up from 10.5 in the previous 12 months. The provisional rate for Māori is 15.8. A family-run business that makes wine and beer coolers and tumblers says it's bedevilled by replicas of its products. Huski founder Simon Husa says that as soon as the company sold on Amazon and won a design award, it had a target on its back. He told Checkpoint it costs thousands chasing copycat manufacturers, overwhelmingly based in China. And the Japanese government has unveiled measures to counter what's called over-tourism, as popular sites like Mount Fuji struggle with a post-pandemic surge of foreign visitors. Many of them are unprepared climbers who leave rubbish behind. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic outside Marlborough Airport at Woodbourne, the road has just reopened after a car fire there. That's State Highway 6 west of Blenheim. And in the Bay of Plenty, State Highway 2, the Waiaweka Gorge Road, Matawai to Opotski, has reopened today after resurfacing work, but it will close again for more work from 7 a.m. in the morning to 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Our next news and weather is at 6 o'clock.
Kia ora rā e ho. A 13-year-old Dunedin boy has launched a campaign to bring back direct international flights to the city. The flights have not been reinstated since borders reopened, and it seems young Benjamin Patterson isn't the only one who wants them back. So far, he's gathered 3,500 signatures. The Year 9 Tairi College student and wannabe pilot joins us now. Hello, Benjamin. Why do you think this is a good idea to get international flights back into Dunedin?
Well, I think it's a good idea because it would save a lot of time and money from citizens of Dunedin or other local nearby areas in travelling, because the closest airport right now is Queenstown, and that is a long drive and requires a lot of time and it's pain.
So, Benjamin, what have people been saying to you about the petition, and what do they think about flights?
They think it's... They've been leaving pretty good comments and positive comments, and they're very supportive and think it's a very good idea that they come back to Dunedin.
You quite like planes, don't you?
Love them.
Tell me about that. Why do you love them so much?
I don't even know. It's just like something I've always liked, but as I've gotten older, it's something that's just come to me, and now it's just my hobby to do it, and then I want to make it my job one day.
So do you watch planes come in and land, and do you take flying lessons at the moment? Tell me a bit about that.
So, yes, I watch the planes come in to Dunedin Airport, and I started my private pilot's licence a few months ago.
Wow, what's that like? What's it like to be up in the skies, in the controls?
It's a very good feeling. Just even like when you pull some of those G-forces, it just feels amazing. It's a great feeling.
And how long will it take you to get your licence?
Well, you have to be 16 to be a holder of a private pilot's licence. I'll have to wait till then.
And did you always love planes and love watching planes? When did you start doing that?
Well, I probably got into them maybe a year ago, but I've always been fascinated with transport, like trains and stuff, but now it's just come to me, and it's planes now, and I watch them and I get hyped up over anything about planes.
So, this campaign that you've launched, who have you written to and what are you asking them?
So I've written to Virgin Australia, Qantas, Jetstar and Air New Zealand, and we've asked them just about the airport and if they're coming back or anything. We've also written to Christopher Luxon, but we've only heard a response from Air New Zealand at the moment.
So what about the airport itself? Have you talked to them about your campaign and what do they think of it?
Yes, I've talked to Megan, who is second in charge at the airport, and they are very, very interested in opening it back up again.
So do you have a goal for your petition, Benjamin? I mean, how many signatures would you like to get? What's your target?
5,000.
We're not that far off, are you?
No. Well, people are filling it out, and we're averaging almost 1,000 a day.
Oh, I think you're going to, well, you know, I'm sorry, take off with this. It's going to be more than 5,000, I'm predicting, if you're getting those kind of numbers every day. When would you like this to happen by? If you were to get international flights direct into Dunedin, when would you like them to come back?
Maybe mid-next year would be a pretty good time, because obviously it does take time and money to bring it back.
Yeah, lead-in times for airlines, you mean, getting themselves organised?
Yeah, it's not just a thing that can happen magically. It does take time, for the airlines to get prepared for that.
And have you got your school on board as well? Do they know what you're up to?
Yes, I think they're aware of what is happening. It's just been a personal project.
Understand.
Of mine.
Understand. It sounds like you're going gangbusters. Thank you so much for your time and the best of luck there with that, Benjamin. Good on you. That's Benjamin Patterson, and he has started this campaign. If you want to check it out, it is on Facebook and it's called Reinstate Dunedin International Flights. As he said, 3,500 signatures already. It's aiming for 5,000, and he's been on a bit of a letter writing campaign too. It is 13 minutes away from 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. A worker at a Manawatu concrete company lost his right arm when he had to pull himself from a machine he was cleaning. The company he worked for, Dunlop Dry Mix Limited, has today been sentenced in the Palmerston North District Court in a workplace health and safety prosecution. Our reporter Jimmy Ellingham was in court and joins us now. Hi Jimmy, this sounds horrendous. What happened?
Yeah, it's one of those horrible workplace safety incidents or accidents. This one happened in November 2021 in Fielding. This worker got to work on the morning in question and decided to clean a conveyor machine. It was a conveyor belt that took this dry concrete mix from where it was made to where it was bagged. And when he started cleaning it, it wasn't on, but at some stage the machine switched on, and that was as the worker was trying to get a compressed air machine out of this conveyor that he was using to clean it, and his fingers were caught in one of the rollers, and he couldn't get himself free. He eventually pulled himself free and his arm came away basically from him, and in what Judge Jonathan Krebs described as a remarkable display of stoicism, the worker ran through the workplace because he was by himself at that point and sought help. His colleagues managed to stem the bleeding, but surgeons couldn't reattach that right arm, and he now uses a prosthetic limb.
And so in court today, what was the outcome?
The company Dunlop Dry Mix was fined $297,000 and ordered to pay $60,000 in emotional harm reparation. That figure for the reparation was reduced a bit for the money they've already contributed to this worker. They paid his salary to the end of 2022, and since he's been on ACC have been topping it up because ACC pays 80% of the salary. There are also reductions for remorse and guilty pleas. This company Dunlop Dry Mix, though, took over this business that makes manufacturing products in mid-2021, immediately did a health and safety audit and recognised some risks, including with this conveyor, this machine. But really all it put in place was some cones and some tape to try to get employees not to go into that area. The company in court said that it wasn't expected that employees would go near that machine during their shifts, but this did happen, and Judge Krebs said that they didn't take adequate steps to ensure that this sort of thing wouldn't happen. And the court also heard there were no plans or procedures in place about how to clean this conveyor.
Did the victim have anything to say today?
The victim wasn't in court and was granted permanent name suppression, but we heard snippets of his victim impact statement, including what Judge Krebs said was quite a chilling section. That's where the victim describes being in immense pain, as you can imagine, when his hand was trapped in this machine, but then the pain stopped when his arm was torn from the shoulder. He also recalls that the victim also recalls one part where he actually there was an emergency stop on the machine, and the victim looked at it but realised it wasn't going. That stop was disconnected. The company issued a statement afterwards reiterating its remorse and saying its thoughts with this worker.
And what about WorkSafe?
Yeah, WorkSafe issued a statement after the court case today, and it acknowledged that Dunlop Dry Mix has since improved its health and safety procedures, and the court did hear today that there were improvements in place even by November 2021 on the business that took over. The previous owner had gone into receivership, but WorkSafe said too many workers are killed or injured by machines, and a life-changing injury such as this could have been avoided if there'd been a simple safeguard in place, as is accepted by the industry standards.
Thank you for that, Jimmy. That's our reporter, Jimmy Ellingham there. It is 9 minutes away from 6. Situations vacant, elevated position in a rapid-paced environment. Must like horses more than carbs. Yep, Aotearoa apparently has a shortage of jockeys. New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing says top-notch riders are always in short supply, but recent suspensions and local jockeys moving offshore have added to the squeeze. New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing Chief Operating Officer Darren Balcombe joins us now. Kia ora, Darren. Does nobody want to be a jockey these days?
Good evening, Lisa. I dreamed of being a jockey, but at 100 kilos, I was no hope. But there's a lot of restrictions on being a jockey. It is a great lifestyle, but you have to be very committed. Weigh in around the 55, 54 kilos, and maintain that weight, I guess, healthily, and be able to ride and control a 500 kilo animal at the same time.
So, no joke when I said you have to like the horses more than the carbs then, Darren.
Oh, you've got to love the horses and avoid the food at all costs, apparently.
Okay, so what is adding to the shortage? Besides that criteria of being about 54 kilos, what else means that you've got shortage of good jockeys, experienced jockeys? Yeah,
I think it's a shortage of experienced jockeys at the moment, just for the number of factors. There's a few jockeys overseas. We've got the best jockey in the world, and James McDonald, currently plying his trade in Sydney, and a number of other top riders, Michael D and Daniel Stackhouse in Melbourne, and a number of others. And I think they've gone off to greener pastures. It's a much bigger market over there, so of course it's very hard to hold our jockeys here. We've had a number of young apprentices go over there in the last year. Our top apprentice from last year, Taylor Mitchell. So it's just it takes time to build a good jockey. There's a 4-year apprenticeship, and there's a lot goes into it, and to get to that experience level and be a great jockey, it does take time and it does take a lot of work.
What do you get paid if you're a jockey?
It's a very good living. I think our top jockey last year, Michael McNabb, earned $4.7 million in stakes, so he gets 5% of those, so around $240,000 just from his stakes, and it's just over $200 a horse ride that they ride. So it's a very good living, and of course our top jockey James McDonald, he'd be earning well into the millions.
So just back to the physical attributes and the requirement of being around 54 kilos. There's no height requirement? Is it just that it's usually petite people who fit that weight criteria?
Yeah, generally. The shorter you are, of course, the easier it is to be at 54 kilos. So
it must be harder to find those people, Darren, as we as a population are we're getting taller and bigger.
We are, yes. I think that's part of it. We're growing as a race, and especially New Zealand, we tend to love the rugby and other things, and that rugby players don't tend to make good jockeys. So it is hard. We do we rely on a lot of jockeys coming in from overseas. We've got a number of South Africans here at the moment, but we'd love to have some more homegrown jockeys. We've introduced pony scurries this year at the races to get these young kids enjoying the excitement of racing, and that seems to be working, and a lot of kids are very excited, and you can ride track work in the morning before you go off and do other things. There's lots of things you can do to be involved in the industry.
What time do you have to get up to be a jockey, Darren?
Oh, it's not as bad as what you think. A lot of trainers now don't start till sort of 5, 6 o'clock, but it is still an early morning, but you do get an early knock-off as well.
Appreciate your time. That is Darren Balcombe from the New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing there. They have a shortage of jockeys, some quite strict criteria you have to make to get into the training program. A Hamilton man has been left with a big repair bill after an Uber Eats driver crashed into his car, then took off. The driver didn't drop off the KFC his next-door neighbours had ordered either. As well as his dinged-up ride, the man has been left frustrated by the lack of help he's received from the rideshare company and tracking the driver down. Crystal Gibbons reports.
Austin Liu's neighbour's Uber Eats order has left him annoyed and potentially out of pocket. The driver delivering food from a Hamilton KFC crashed into his car whilst delivering food to a neighbour across the road a couple of weeks ago.
The driver came over and then crashed into my car, creating a damage to the front bumper, and then did a runner.
The neighbour also didn't get his food. Instead, Mr. Liu says the order was cancelled and all information about the transaction wiped from the app. He's been trying to contact Uber to track the driver down, but he says he hasn't been able to find a way to make a complaint.
I visited their website, and then there was this option called I was involved in a car accident. I was trying to use that portal to lodge my complaint because I had no ways to do so. I submitted all the information, the message and stuff like that. I couldn't submit it. I was not allowed because I didn't have any order number.
Consumer New Zealand Communications Manager Jessica Walker isn't surprised.
Unfortunately, we know from previous investigations that we've done where we look into how hard it is to find contact details for different companies. Uber Eats is one of the hardest to track down.
Mr. Liu has also gone to the KFC where the order came from to track the driver down, but he says they refuse to give him any information.
Because of privacy, they're not allowed to review any footage to me. So they asked me to contact Uber myself, and once Uber establishes the case and file it to the police, and then the police can request the footage for me, which can't be done because I can't even contact anyone from Uber.
When approached today, KFC directed RNZ back to Uber. Mr. Liu's neighbour has been able to get a hold of Uber through his account. The rideshare company told him they were not liable but would cooperate with any inquiries made by police. Ms Walker says if the offending vehicle's registration number is known, the owner of the damaged vehicle can lodge a claim with the disputes tribunal. But alas, Mr. Liu didn't get the rego.
So that means that it kind of becomes an internal issue at that point between the employer being Uber Eats and the employee being the driver. And so it's up to Uber Eats to find out who was driving the vehicle.
In a statement, Uber told RNZ it takes all reports of incidents like this seriously. It apologised for the customer's experience with its support services and said it was now working to contact the people involved to try and reach a resolution.
Right, let's get to some of your feedback now. A number of you getting in touch. This is about the joint statement from Five Eyes, the Intelligence Alliance. They've called China out for alleged large-scale theft of intellectual property. This listener says, we in America gave up on fighting this war long ago, in capital letters. All corporates there know they cannot win that war. It is a fact of business now. That's from Mark. Someone else says, having worked for large retail groups, the issue is not factories, but retailers and other brands. They take sample products to factories and ask them to make them with a slightly different design or with cheaper materials. This is standard practice for agents and retailers around the world and in New Zealand. That is a very interesting point. Another person says another focus should also be on New Zealand companies that are quite happy to import inferior and possibly dangerous products and sell them. These are turning up on building sites and look the same to those installing them and taking all the risk. On the subject of Sara Lee, this is the demise of the company that makes yummy stuff. Sara Lee, according to Nona, under much debate. Jude has got in touch to say Sara Lee sticky date pudding was to die for. Evie?
Yes, husband, big fan.
Never had it before. Others, multiples in here on the deep dish apple pie.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Tēnā tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. US President Joe Biden says he's secured an agreement for the delivery of a limited amount of aid to Gaza, where 12 days of Israeli siege and bombardment have caused an acute humanitarian crisis. Speaking on his way home after his visit to Israel, Mr. Biden said President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi of Egypt had agreed to open the Rafah border crossing.
He agreed that what he would do is open the gate to let up to 20 trucks through to begin with. They're going to patch the roads. They have to fill in potholes to get these trucks through. They expect it'll take about 8 hours. So there may be nothing rolling through until Friday.
President Biden said he'd been very blunt with the Israelis about the need to relieve the suffering of Palestinian civilians as the war with Hamas continues. A family-run business that makes wine and beer coolers and tumblers says it's constantly fighting off mostly Chinese-made replicas of its product. Huski founder Simon Husa has told Checkpoint that as soon as they sold on Amazon and won a design award, they had a target on their back. He says spending more than $50,000 to get their trademark and design protected has saved them millions, but it still costs thousands chasing each copycat manufacturer. In the past year, they've issued 70 cease and desist letters to factories or suppliers.
Who will take our designs, replicate them, make them in their factories, and then offer them up to either consumers for sale or often for resellers, so individuals or companies who will then buy in mass quantities and sell them on their own websites or marketplaces.
Simon Husa says as soon as they've dealt with one copycat, another pops up. A Wellington woman found dead at her home on Monday is believed to have been killed by her son, who died in Hong Kong the same day. Irini Katsuyanis was 62. Lauren Crimp is outside the Miramar home where her body was found.
Mrs. Katsuyanis' death has sent shockwaves through this quiet community. The widowed mother of three was an active member of the local Greek community. She taught piano and was deeply involved with Netball Wellington, setting up the Olympics Netball Club. Her son left the country on Sunday, the day before his mother's body was discovered. Hong Kong media have reported he was taken to hospital before his death on Monday night.
The Ministry of Education has received an anonymous complaint after discovering the husband of a South Otago principal is a convicted sex offender. Simon Melville was convicted of a sexual assault that occurred in 2007. He's the husband of the Catlins area school principal. The ministry says it's aware this information is being circulated anonymously and the school has child protection policies in place. The Board of Trustees is encouraging parents with concerns to contact them. Some students and teachers at Massey University are calling for Vice-Chancellor Jan Thomas to resign. The university is proposing to cut more than 100 jobs in the humanities and social sciences. The Vice-President of Massey's Student Association, Hennessy Wilson, says the cuts will ruin the school.
I think it's going to be devastating for the teachers and the students. The teachers are losing their jobs, but the students are going to lose that quality of teaching. For instance, in politics and international relations, we have 6 professors turning into 3, and they have 12 PhD students, so they're going to be stressed and overworked.
Hennessy Wilson says the cuts are a result of financial mismanagement by Jan Thomas, who should resign. Uber has apologised for the way it handled a complaint about a hit and run. A Hamilton man complained after an Uber Eats driver crashed into his car while delivering food to a neighbour. Austin Liu says the driver fled and his efforts to track him down have been stonewalled by the company. Following inquiries made by RNZ today, Uber has now apologised for the response from its customer support team. It says it's now working to contact the people involved and get a resolution. Residents of a Northland Valley hope they'll be safe from future storms now that a bridge they blame for regular floods has been demolished. Contractors today dismantled Pokapu Bridge west of Kawakawa, which locals say diverted floodwaters straight down their main road and into homes in Moirewa and Otiria. Project manager Jaco Cronje says that together with a 900-metre-long spillway, the replacement bridge will reduce future flooding.
The ultimate aim is to keep the water in the spillway in heavy rain events so that it doesn't bypass or overflow at the river and end up in Otiria and Moirewa. Otiria and Moirewa are going underwater quite regularly, so this stop bank and flood mitigation project will definitely assist the whānau down there not to go underwater anymore.
Jaco Cronje says the new bridge is 3 times wider than the old one. And Microsoft has added an AI to its Office apps, claiming it will take the drudgery out of office work. But some fear the software, called Copilot, could take over admin roles. The BBC's technology editor, Zoe Kleinman, was given a demonstration.
The first thing I watched Copilot do was summarise a long chain of emails in one paragraph and then, in just a few moments, generate a warm reply. The only thing was I hadn't read a single word anyone had sent me. Then it created a basic PowerPoint presentation using a report it had drafted earlier in Microsoft Word. This took about 43 seconds. The content was fictional for demonstration only, but the message was clear. Copilot is a formidable and competitive colleague. However, it might fall foul of incoming AI rules because Microsoft doesn't make clear when content is generated by the tech rather than by human. The firm says that's up to the individual, but regulators in Europe and China say it's up to the developer to make sure its tools are used responsibly.
That's the news.
This Saturday morning, Irish writer Paul Lynch. His novel Prophet Song is on the Booker shortlist. Empathy is his theme. It's a scary read. Fainty Balogun's One Man and His Mum production, Can I Live, is a massively entertaining take on climate change. Sounds wrong, but there it is. And Kate Mulgrew, Star Trek's Captain Janeway, and Red in Orange is the New Black. Call Kim Hillaho. Join me Saturday morning from 8 on RNZ National.
You're back on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For Northland, mostly cloudy, occasional rain mainly in the north, gradually spreading south tomorrow. Auckland and Coromandel, fine today. Becoming cloudy tomorrow morning with a few showers in the east tomorrow evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine apart from isolated showers this afternoon and evening. Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty, the Central High Country and Wairarapa. Partly cloudy, isolated showers today and also areas of fog tomorrow morning. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, mainly fine today. Showers about the fjords and Stewart Island, spreading elsewhere tomorrow. For the rest of the South Island, fine for most. However, isolated showers about Westland tomorrow and also areas of morning cloud about the Canterbury coast. And for Rekohu, Chatham Islands, mainly fine, low cloud tomorrow morning. It is coming up to 8 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It is a lifeline for Gaza, but only a limited one. Israel has agreed to permit the opening of the Rafah border crossing with Egypt to allow some trucks of aid to enter the war-ravaged strip. The move comes after US President Joe Biden's trip to Israel, during which he urged Israelis not to become consumed by rage. The ABC's Nicole Johnston has the story.
It was a whirlwind trip in the middle of war. US President Joe Biden arrived in Israel and left within 8 hours, securing a deal with the Israelis to allow limited supplies into southern Gaza through Egypt's Rafah border crossing.
People of Gaza need food, water, medicine, shelter. Today I asked the Israeli cabinet, who I met with for some time this morning, to agree to the delivery of life-saving humanitarian assistance to civilians in Gaza, based on the understanding that there will be inspections and that the aid should go to civilians, not to Hamas.
Biden urged Israelis not to let grief and anger lead them down a dangerous path. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
This is the first time the President of the United States has come to Israel during a war. I talked to him about the horrors we went through, the terrible pain of bereavement and grief that afflicts us all.
Meanwhile, conflicting accounts continue of Wednesday's strike on a hospital in Gaza, which Palestinian officials say left about 500 people dead. Hamas insists Israel was responsible, but Israel says its own investigation has found another militant group, Islamic Jihad, was behind it after misfiring a rocket. President Biden says US intelligence agrees with Israel. Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta was in the hospital when the strike hit. And a warning, some listeners may find details of his account distressing.
There was the screech of a kind of incoming missile and then a huge explosion. Part of the false ceiling of the OR fell on us. I kind of stumbled towards the outside of the operating room suite. And when I stepped outside, I could see the courtyard of the hospital on fire. The ambulances were on fire. And you could see from the light of the fire that the courtyard was just strewn with dead bodies and, bits of bodies.
The Middle East is being rocked by protests. From Tunisia to Turkey, Lebanon, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, people are taking to the streets. Jordan, Egypt and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas refused to meet with President Biden. Palestinian political analyst Noor O'Day.
I can tell you that this whole region is on the brink of the abyss. That's how serious the situation is. The anger is palpable. People feel invisible. They feel that their pain is invisible, including by their own leaders who are under increasing American pressure to either be silent in defiance of their public opinion or to side with Israel, which is seen as the occupying power, and Arab publics can't tolerate that kind of alignment.
Back in Australia, repatriation flights for those in Israel have been arriving. But 44 Australians are still stuck in Gaza. Australia's spy boss has warned against inflammatory language on the war, saying neo-Nazis and Islamic extremists could use it to recruit people. Ed Husick is the Federal Minister for Industry and Science. He says Australia must speak up against what he calls the collective punishment of Palestinians in Gaza.
We don't see any public landmarks in Australia that are being lit up in red, black, white and green. Now, there'll be people that are very uncomfortable with me making that remark, but it goes to the heart of what Palestinians and those who care for them in Australia, what they think, which is that Palestinian lives are considered lesser than.
With US President Biden now out of Israel, it clears the way for Israel to launch its ground invasion of Gaza. The question now is when.
Blood-soaked mattresses and personal belongings have been left strewn across the courtyard of Gaza City's Al Ali Arabi Hospital. BBC correspondent Rushdie Abu Alouf has been to the hospital in the heart of Gaza. And just a warning, the following report contains distressing content.
When I arrived to the hospital this morning, they were still collecting the dead. After what looks to have been the deadliest moment we have seen so far in Gaza. There were burnt out cars after a huge fire following last night's blast. I was talking to one of the people who witnessed this, what the Palestinians are calling massacre. He said that they were just sitting in the garden peacefully and suddenly huge explosion rocked this area. He said we collecting bodies, injured people. We evacuated serious injuries using a motorcycle. Some of people evacuated on foot. He said from here to Shifa Hospital. Blood-soaked mattresses lay on the ground. As we picked our way through the devastation, bread scattered, aimed wreckage. Children's backpacks and collapsed tent where people had been sleeping. Doctors told us thousands were seeking shelters at the hospital when it happened. Eyewitnesses said the hospital ground were packed with people living under siege and under fire. People are still collecting body pieces from on the ground. People are still in panic. People are still trying to understand what happened. Fear, grief, and anger.
My message to the world: stand up for the right thing. Don't be afraid of the Americans. Don't be afraid of the Israeli air forces. We will continue this fight until the last drop of blood.
Health officials here are saying hundreds are dead, injured, and missing. This is the moment of horror for Palestinians, already traumatized by this war.
From Gaza to the Ukraine, where the country's special forces have used jet skis to infiltrate Russian-occupied Crimea. CNN's Fred Pleitgen spoke with members of the Bratstov Battalion.
A brazen attack from the sea, Ukrainian forces using jet skis to land in Russian-occupied Crimea. The fighter speaking goes by the call sign musician. He tells me the operation was successful but tough. While we were landing, the sea was stormy, he says. The waves were up to 2 meters high, plus Russian warships were patrolling, the Raptors. The Ukrainians say they also managed to destroy Russian military gear before racing off across the Black Sea, using larger boats to carry fuel for the jet skis on the long journey back to Ukrainian-held territory. Musician says these missions are militarily essential. It helps our forces in the trenches, he says. We distract the enemy's attention towards us, and the enemy is forced to relocate their personnel and vehicles to the Crimean seaside. Ukraine has started a major campaign against Russian military targets in and around Crimea, hitting the HQ of Moscow's Black Sea Fleet, damaging a submarine and a Russian landing ship, as well as hitting an airbase. The Ukrainians use drones and cruise missiles for some of the attacks, but rely on a network of undercover partisan groups inside Crimea for information and targeting. One of the groups agreed to answer our questions, but only in writing for security reasons. We constantly monitor all military facilities on the territory of the Crimean Autonomous Region with the help of our agents and residents of Crimea, who constantly inform us, the Atesh Group writes. A wide and developed system of agents allows you to make a choice. One of the key targets Ukraine has hit several times, the Kerch Bridge linking occupied Crimea to the Russian mainland. The attacks have led to severe disruptions, Russian leader Vladimir Putin vowing revenge. There will definitely be a response from Russia, he said. The Ministry of Defense is preparing proposals. For the Ukrainians, missions like these are also psychologically important, one of the planners of the jet ski raid tells me. We are fighting a trench war on the front lines, and the armed forces' success is not so obvious, he says. And special operations of this kind in the rear or in the sea, they inspire and give energy to keep fighting. And the fighters in the Bratstva unit say their next infiltrations are already in the works, but they won't say when, where, or how.
It's 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Delays and poor service are among the common complaints from Australians about their country's airlines. But after months of public scrutiny, the industry is set to come under extra scrutiny, with the federal government launching a fresh inquiry by the consumer watchdog. Consumer experts hope it will lead to better protections for customers. Here's the ABC's Matt Bamford.
When it comes to the state of Australia's airline industry, most customers would agree it's not flying high right now. During the pandemic, cancellations became frustratingly common, and in recent months, many feel they're not getting value for money.
This would be an absolute low point in terms of consumer experience of airlines in Australia in two key areas.
Alan Kirkland is CEO of consumer advocacy group Choice.
One is prices. People have noticed they're paying significantly more than before COVID, and some of the top prices you quoted are absolutely outrageous. But also the degradation of service. So even on airlines that claim to be premium like Qantas, the levels of customer service, the levels of reliability have degraded significantly, and people are really disappointed and at worst angry.
Choice has been monitoring airline performance for years, but Alan Kirkland says the level of frustration has reached a peak, and he believes it's taking too long to fix.
It's really clear that you can't trust the airlines, particularly those major dominant airlines like Qantas and Virgin to sort out this mess themselves. You need to have an independent watchdog that's looking at the data of what's happening and telling government what needs to change to bring more competition into the industry.
Politicians are aware of these frustrations and have pursued airline executives for answers through a series of fiery public hearings. The most recent examined the government's decision to block Qatar Airways from accessing additional routes. At one point, former Qantas CEO Alan Joyce was threatened with jail if he failed to appear. Now the federal government is taking further action, directing the consumer watchdog to take a closer look at the sector. It wants the ACCC to monitor the prices, costs and profits of the major domestic airlines, something it had been doing since 2020 but had been allowed to lapse. Alan Kirkland again.
That's where the ACCC is such a critical body. It is in a position to really lay out the data about what's happening, looking at whether the economic data justifies the sort of price rises that airlines are claiming and charging, but also looking at what's happening in terms of how airlines are treating their customers.
The monitoring will be restarted thanks to a deal between the government and independent Senator David Pocock. Professor Greg Bamber is an expert in the airline industry at Monash University Business School.
It's important to have independent monitoring of markets where the key players have excessive market power.
What could the government realistically do about flight prices and standards?
The government could strengthen consumer law. Currently, there's a complete imbalance between the power of the big airlines and the power of the customers. For example, the airline can cancel your flight, give you no compensation. But if you wish to change your flight, it charges excessive fees for doing so and rebooking the flight. So that should be levelled out. Either compensation should be offered to us if our flight is cancelled or badly delayed, as in Europe, or we should be given more flexibility to be able to change our flights if we wish to do so without the airlines engaging in price gouging.
While the move is welcomed, Professor Bamber says there's concern about the influence of operators on the government.
There's a danger that the industry will try and prevent these sorts of reforms as it has done in the past. But it's important that the government and the regulator intervenes in the market to give a better deal for customers and the people who work in the industry.
The monitoring is expected to continue for 3 years.
There's a scramble to find missing radioactive material from South Australia. The material, which has been missing for about 3 weeks, was used in a steelworks on the Eyre Peninsula. The ABC's Angus Randall reports.
It's always in the last place you look. A radioactive piece of material used in steel production has gone missing somewhere at the Liberty One Steel site in Whyalla on South Australia's Eyre Peninsula. Keith Baldry is the Director of Science and Systems at the state's Environmental Protection Authority.
It's an industrial gauge for measuring bin levels. It's a cobalt-60 radioactive source, which is quite small, just a few millimetres, in a 50-kilogram container, which is, I guess, a bit like a squat LPG cylinder that you have at the back of your house.
In January, a radioactive capsule went missing along a 1,000-kilometre stretch of road in WA, sparking a massive search for what experts called a needle in a haystack. This search is different. Because the radioactive material is safely contained in a large drum, it'll be harder to find with radiation detectors. Keith Baldry says there's no significant risk, just don't open the drum.
It's about 35 years old, so it's decayed to about 100 times less than it was new. So in the container, it's actually quite difficult now to detect. It is something that obviously should not happen.
A spokesperson for the GFG Alliance, which is the umbrella company for Liberty One Steel, says there's no evidence the material has left the steelworks on the outskirts of Whyalla. Keith Baldry believes the material was accidentally thrown away.
They're doing some decommissioning at the site. It's been likely incorporated into some of their waste piles, and on that basis, we don't think that there is a risk. However, it should not be allowed to be collected up with the waste and put into the waste pile.
You might be wondering why a steelworks needs radioactive material. Dr. Edward Obbard is a nuclear materials engineer at the University of New South Wales.
Radiation is quite penetrating, right? So it shines through things like steel. So definitely you use a radioactive source to measure the thickness of steel plate in a steelworks. You use it to find gaps in castings and welds, so that's a type of non-destructive testing.
There's a larger discussion around where Australia's low and intermediate nuclear waste should be stored after the plans for a waste site at Kimber, just over 100 kilometres west of Whyalla, were scrapped. If this material is found, it'll likely spend the rest of its life at the steelworks until the radiation disappears.
Being radioactive and having a half-life, they are in fact in the process of vanishing. That's what the half-life means. So you don't really have to do anything with them in terms of waste management. You just have to, A, do nothing, and B, continue to be responsible for the material. So the reason this is an incident, right, is because someone has lost responsibility for the material while it was decaying, and we have to find it again.
The EPA would be in charge of determining any punishment for losing the radioactive material.
Leaders from the so-called Global South are meeting in Beijing this week to discuss President Xi Jinping's ambitious Belt and Road initiative. One of the most recent projects is a high-speed railway in Indonesia. But like many China-backed projects, it's not without controversy. The BBC's Nick Marsh went for a ride.
This is the fastest train in all of Southeast Asia. It's certainly faster than any train in the US or the UK. Now, right now, I'm in Jakarta and I'm heading to Bandung. If we were driving, it'd take about 3 hours. But with whoosh, it'll take about 45 minutes. But actually, this really wasn't supposed to have been built by China. Japan, with their famous Shinkansen rail system, they were the heavy favourites to win the bid. They said that they'd finance the project at basically 0% interest, but they did need a guarantee from the Indonesian government that they'd step in with money if anything went wrong. But then China came in with a counter-offer. They said, we're going to build this cheaper, we'll build it quicker, and we don't need any guarantee from the Indonesian government. But they did want 2% interest on their loan. Well, Indonesia picked China, to many people's surprise. But in the end, this project is 3 years late, it's $2 billion over budget, and the interest rate's gone up to 3.4%. Oh, and the Indonesian government did have to fork out some money in the end. We're in Bandung. It was pretty fast, I've got to say. And to be fair, this isn't the first railway line in the world that's late or over budget. Countries like Indonesia are hungry for infrastructure, and China can provide that infrastructure. When it goes well, it's a win-win. The problem is that when things don't go according to plan, the risks, political, economic, environmental, they do seem to be a bit one-sided. But that's simply something that Indonesia was willing to accept when it jumped on the BRI train.
Amazon is planning to start using drones for deliveries in the UK next year. They're already in use in some parts of the United States, meaning the days of refreshing a tracking website are over. The BBC's Emma Simpson went to see how it all works.
You know what it's like, waiting for an online order, wondering when the van is going to turn up. But look into the distance. This one's coming by air. In the small town of Lockford, California, Amazon is using drones to deliver packages to customers. This service is coming to the UK too. Jeff loves it.
It's fun. I never thought I'd be getting packages delivered in my backyard. So when you order it, we see it within 20 to 30 minutes. So obviously quicker than having to run to the store and getting this stuff.
What about the noise?
The noise it's a little loud, but it doesn't disturb me.
Mission accepted.
Pre-flight checks complete.
Cleared by all, launching.
So how does it work? So now the exciting bit. We're the first to see behind the scenes at Amazon's launch facility. Here's a parcel going out. It can't be bigger than a shoebox, nor weigh more than 5 pounds. The drone can reach customers up to 3.5 miles away. The rules are strict. Each flight is monitored, and there's a human eye keeping tabs on it too. A flying robot that knows exactly where to go. How does it know not to bump into anything?
So our sense and avoid technology will observe a threat in the sky or on the ground, make a course correction, and safely find a path to deliver to customers.
Drones are never going to replace vans, but this is a glimpse of the future. Online deliveries in just minutes. And here at this Amazon site in Seattle, a new drone is being unveiled.
This is a drone coming to the UK. It's smaller, it's lighter, it travels further, and it's most importantly at least 40% quieter to our previous drones.
Is that safe?
It's absolutely safe. It is hundreds of times safer than driving to the store.
Just one location to begin with. Exactly how and where it can fly has still to be worked out.
You know, we'll scale slowly, we'll scale with communities, and we'll scale based on what our regulatory approvals are.
Amazon believes the demand is there. Here in America, though, progress hasn't been quick, but it's got big ambitions, aiming for 500 million global drone deliveries by the end of the decade.
OK, the last word tonight goes to Jim from Papamoa, who heard our story about a shortage of jockeys and says, after hearing the interview, I'd like to be a jockey. Do they have Clydesdale races anywhere, says Jim, 80 kilos. Maybe you could double me, Jim, and we'll just really get down to business on the Clydesdale. Now, tune in to First Up at 5 a.m. tomorrow. They speak to New Zealand pro golfer Mike Hendry, who went from the cancer ward back to the winner's circle in less than 6 months. Great story.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. The Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Gaza is to be opened to allow up to 20 trucks through with humanitarian aid. Protesters at Massey University are calling for Vice-Chancellor Jan Thomas to resign because of plans to cut more than 100 jobs. The 5 companies that have pleaded guilty in the Whakaari White Island health and safety case will be sentenced in February. Uber has apologised for the way it handled a complaint about a hit and run by an Uber Eats driver in Hamilton. And the